All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Leader Living Life podcast in the second episode in our series with our friend Lori Blatt. This episode is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to talk about the buyer's journey and how it's completely disrupted right now due to COVID-19. But I think as you hear Lori talk through this, there are other disruptions that will always find their way into the buyer's journey. And how are you going to deal with that interruption and disruption and pivot, which I think is an essential concept for today. We're also going to talk about knowing who your audience is and creating an ICA. So Lori will get into the description of the ICA. It's a really cool concept. I think you guys are going to like it quite a bit. And then what's the key step that's often left to chance? So it's kind of like the mystery takeaway for today. But I think we've got a great episode for you. So without any further delay, Lori, do you want to give the audience a quick introduction for those that haven't met yet?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Eric. I am Lori Blatt. I am a creative strategist and marketing maven. My company, Blattcom, is located up in Allentown, PA, and I focus my marketing efforts on B2B companies, typically in manufacturing, construction, and professional services. So I help them identify their ideal audience, come up with a plan to help them communicate, and pull together the tools to help them do that.
Yeah, and even though you have an industry focus, I think my industry focus is non-existent. Like I work in all kinds of industries. I think your content though is really industry agnostic, meaning with just a little bit of imagination, any industry could look at this and go, I get how this applies to me.
Yes.
So I think it's really going to be powerful for everyone that's in today.
Excellent.
So let's kick it off. What is the buyer's journey?
So a lot of times businesses have a great service, a great product. It's kind of that field of dreams. We're going to build it and they will just come and they will just buy it and use our services and everything will be good. Well, there really is, when you step back and you think about how did that customer get to you? What were their pain points? What were they in need of? And if you really peel back the onion in terms of those needs, it's not simply, I needed a marketing plan or I needed an IT service. There was a pain that drove them to that decision that I have a need to fill. And it's really beginning to understand where your potential customer or your active customer is at and meeting them there. So the buyer's journey really helps you map this out, because as we were talking earlier, Eric, this is really an ebb and flow. This is a rolling type of process.
Yep.
The journey in of itself is not just a single step and next step and boom, you're done. It is a continuation, kind of like just a rolling set of waves. Each time you're moving that ideal prospect a little bit further down the path to becoming a client.
Yep.
And it's all those touch points in between to help them see you as the person, the company, the service that can best help them.
Yeah, and I see this with a lot of clients. And for those of you that have not looked at us on YouTube, please do. We'll publish a podcast out there, and you'll have video of Lori and I. But I'm also going to share her graphic of what she's talking about, because the visual of it makes it really resonate.
Yeah. So this, really, this was a challenge that was, posed to me by my clients and my work with them, is how do I help them see where all of these pieces fit together? So this is just kind of a generic map And obviously this would be filled with all these different possible touch points. What I did here is kind of gave just an overview, umbrella headings for some of the different ways that you are going to build out your buyer's journey and figure out where you are best able to communicate with them. So one thing to understand is there is push marketing, where we are going forward at our audience, paid advertising, targeted campaigns. We're pushing what we're selling, what we're offering out to them. And then there's pull marketing, where we're putting our thoughts out there, we're putting our brand out there, the experience of what it's like working with us, buying from us. We're putting that out there in a way that our audience can find us and engage with us when we hit those trigger points for them. So that's kind of how I've divided the line here. And you start with your ideal prospect, but I don't want to overlook two components down below. And that is, we find our ideal prospect by networking and by developing a circle of influence, using those connections who are in related or maybe totally unrelated industries. Maybe they're vendors of ours, or they're colleagues that service different industries that are related to our target audience. But they know us, they've worked with us, maybe they've actually been a client or vice versa, and we have a relationship, and they become referral sources. And you cannot put a dollar amount on the value of a COI, a circle of influence, who is making a reference for you. It is so important. And networking really is part of your own buyer's journey as a business owner, key executive, of how you're representing your brand. So that's really the starting point as you're doing these relationships and this connecting. You're looking for that ideal prospect. So you queued it up for me, Eric, about really this ICA, we call them sometimes, ideal client avatar. It's this, could be called a persona as well. The terms change, but it's this idea that you have very clear in your head who your client is, to the point where you name them. You give them an age range. You describe what they look like, how they dress, how they perceive your industry, why they're there. I mean, it is just like painting this story of a person who is your ideal, and recognizing who your ideal is and who they're not. Because if you're kind of going out there, and let's just say I've worked with some solopreneurs in another business that I have, where, well, I'm targeting working moms. I'm like, well, there are a lot of working moms out there.
And that's a broad definition, yeah.
It is. And in my opinion, any stay-at-home mom is a working mom.
Right.
It's not just somebody who's outside the office. So really, really getting clear and drilling down into who that ideal prospect is. Because when you know who your ICA is, your ideal client avatar, then you can really start putting together the pieces on this buyer's journey. So let's talk just about the linear sections as we go from left to right. So a lot of your initial work on the buyer's journey and putting your messaging together is really to build awareness. So you've probably heard the phrase, know, like, and trust. And that is really that equation. People need to know who you are. They need to see you. They need to hear your name. They need to see it coming up more than once in their path. And you start to build that relationship. Now, if you're active via a website, via social media, maybe you're putting out writing in terms of a blog or articles. If they are seeing you in different contexts. Now they're able to see how you think, the words you use, how you relate to them, and you move from now they know you, now they start to like you. Now they may start to actually subscribe. They might start to recommend, hey, I heard about this company, you might want to check them out. They're liking what you say, they're sharing, and then you're starting to move into that area that is so important, which is trust. How can you build trust with your ideal prospect through this buyer's journey? And a lot of times what companies are sometimes reluctant to do is share too much. They want to they're so anxious to make the sale that they don't take enough time to realize we are living in an internet world today.
Mm-hmm.
People can Google anything.
Right.
So put education out there that will benefit your ideal prospect. And when they see that kind of value and that education, and that you're giving them something with no strings attached, again, that feeds that know, like, and trust equation to the point where now they're going to move into the explore phase. So they're going to connect with you. Maybe it's through LinkedIn. Maybe it's joining a Facebook page that you have. Maybe they take a survey that you have online. They start to engage with you, and they're willing to give you your email address. And databases are so important. And when you tip that process, now you've got them in a new part of the buyer's journey, because now they have opted in to hear what you have to say, and that is so critical.
Lori, can I just ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
And if I'm getting ahead of this, just let me know. But it resonates with me that I don't see a lot of companies really understanding this. Why is it? Like, what have you discovered in working with your clients and in your network? Why does this get overlooked? Is it people don't understand? I mean, it feels to me like, I think of this as kind of lead gen and in those traditional senses, right? So we see companies using CRMs like Salesforce and Dynamic CRM, those types of things. And it feels more like brute force, dialing for dollars, cold calling. And it seems to be absence of the strategy or the sustainability of what you're talking about. And I know it goes further, but just even that step of how do you get people to talk to? Why are these, because it's so rational when you see it on the graphic, why is this overlooked so much?
Well, I think you touched on, there's two ways to answer that. So you touched on strategy. When I go into my B2B clients, I always ask, do you have a strategic plan? If they don't, there's some background work that I will walk them through. I'm not a strategic planner, and it's a whole art unto itself. But there's some basic, SWOT and understanding services, and that has to be documented in order to build out this journey. Because if you don't have that strategic plan in place, where what you're doing the next 90 days, what you're doing, what your plans are for the year, what your BHAG is for the next 3 years, it makes marketing impossible. Because then it's just, you're all over the place. And I think a lot of times that can be a root cause of missing this whole buyer's journey. I think we also get impatient. We want to make the sales. We've got sales numbers to meet, quotas, targets, all good stuff. Metrics are important. I'm not knocking metrics. But a lot of times we don't realize that people need that know, like, and trust factor, and that takes time to build. And creating a buyer's journey really helps everybody in the company, from the receptionist, who may be the first point of contact for a prospect or that new client, to the guys on the shipping dock. Like, everybody needs to understand their role in this buyer's journey and how what they do impacts it. And
Absolutely.
I think when leadership at a company really sits down and thinks about this, it honestly makes marketing more effective. It helps bring everybody on board, deliver a better consumer experience. And I think that all, that is all going to support the sales effort, because now, marketing's there helping sales along the way, because there's a marketing journey, there's a sales journey. They overlap, they're not always the same. And the two pieces, I think we've talked about maybe addressing this in a future episode, Eric, but like, marketing and sales are not one and the same. They're complementary. They coexist, but they serve different roles along the buyer's journey, and that's just always really important to remember. So I think it gets overlooked because companies want those results and sometimes don't put the pieces in place to build a relationship long term.
Do you find that people struggle with even defining the ideal prospect?
Oh yeah. Yes.
That actually seems like a pretty hard question. Like, I see it and I'm like, oh yeah, well, of course you got to do that. But I'm thinking in my mind, well, what's mine? So as I'm looking, I'm kind of challenging myself a bit and thinking about my clients and associates, that just people I've worked with. I think that's really, I think it's a really powerful concept. And I think time well spent. Yeah.
It absolutely is. And again, I think it comes back to this idea that if we have the attitude or the thought process that anybody can be our customer.
Yeah, whoever will buy my shit is my ideal prospect.
Exactly. Then there's just, where do you start? Like, where do you start advertising? Where do you start your conversations? What is your message? If that is so broad, but if you can, really drill down, and hey, I'm guilty too. Like this, I did not come out of school understanding this or knowing this. It's been a cumulative process. And even I had to say at some point, I can't work for everybody. The technology in my industry just changes so rapidly. I'm going to focus in. And, I started at high level. Like, I could work for B2C clients. I could work for B2B. I chose B2B. And under those B2B category, I love manufacturing. I think it's so cool to see things get built and get put together. I think if my math skills had been better, I would have been an engineer, but that was not meant to be. So this is how I fulfill that, part of my psyche. So it's just seeing how these businesses build things from raw ingredients to the finished product. And they are so good at that. And, it takes that engineering mind, that innovation mind. But a lot of times they are not the best at figuring out, well, how does our customer need to be engaged to decide that we are the manufacturer of choice for them for that particular product. And that's where I get to step in as a creative strategist and say, look, this is what makes you unique. And you're unique to this buyer because. And I had done some work in the past for a structural steel company. Such an awesome client to be involved with. And when we initially sat down and looked at their brand overall, they had this slogan about miscellaneous metals in their tagline. And I'm there as a marketing consultant. I was I have no background in structural steel. So I asked, so what is miscellaneous metals? Like, I thought you worked in steel. And they're like, oh yeah, it has nothing to do with different metals. It's just like guardrails, handrails, things like that, like miscellaneous metals. I'm like, oh, okay. How much of that work do you do? How, in the big scheme of things of, your revenue pie, how much does that represent? Oh, like less than 10%. I'm like, well, okay. Is it profitable? They're like, no, not really. No, usually the jobs aren't big enough. And I'm like, okay, do you like doing it? And they're like, no, it's just kind of, we threw the service in because we get asked for it sometimes. I'm like, okay, then is this really the ideal client then that you want? Someone who wants miscellaneous metals? And it like, they sat back and they like looked at me and they're like, no. And I was like, then it doesn't go in the tagline. You can choose to do that for key customers if you want, but this is not who we're selling to. And it was kind of like those aha moments where sometimes you need that outside person to come in and kind of peel back the layers and say, is this really who you are today? Maybe that made sense 5-10 years ago, but today, who is your ideal customer? Where are you making the most money? And what niche are you filling where you can really stand out?
Yeah, it's almost like they figured out who their least ideal customer is or prospect through that.
Yeah, sometimes that's part of the process, and that just helps you get clearer on who it is by knowing who you do not want to serve, and it just gets clear. And honestly, Eric, it's a process. It may take several passes through, and I will say too, some companies are going to have more than one ideal audience depending on what their service offering is. Mm-hmm. So it's important that this is not necessarily just one bucket, but it may be multiple buckets that need slightly different messaging and understanding that, so that you can talk to them in a way that's going to move them through this process.
Yeah, so through the majority of my career, I was a buyer, not a seller. But even as a seller, I've sat in presentations and pitches where it's painfully obvious that the seller does not know who their ideal prospect is. And it's a hot mess every time because they struggle to try to find a thing that you're going to bite on. Mm-hmm. They'll just keep throwing stuff against the wall. And it comes across as very disjointed, disorganized. And we never get to the trust phase for sure, because it's like, man, what am I going to actually count on these people to do? Whether that's a product or services. And we don't get to the no either, because it grates on the buyer's attention, right? And it's like, oh man, I have so much to do today, and I am not going to sit through this 50-page slide deck of what they could possibly do because they know someone.
I think one of the key steps here along the way is really listening and recognizing when someone is not your ideal client, because you've done the work and you've gotten very clear, and maybe you get to a certain point in the relationship, in the conversation, where what they need is not what you have. There is such power in being able to just say that to them. You know what? We are not the right source for this. We are not the right vendor or team or firm or agency, however you envision yourself. But to make a recommendation, to connect them with someone who is better suited to help them, mm-hmm. that is part of the buyer's journey. They're going to remember that. And that is going to help to build that trust factor, that they weren't just out to sell me. They were out to make sure that I was getting the best possible solution to my issue. They recognized they weren't it. I wasn't their best client. Mm-hmm. They weren't the firm to help me, but they pointed me in the right direction. So that is absolutely part of understanding who your audience is and being willing to share knowledge and education and move them on if it's not a good fit.
Do you ever get pushback that people want to skip that step and jump right in to build awareness? Like, well, we'll figure the prospects out later. Let's get our brand out there. Let's do our website. Let's do our, like, do you get any pushback on it? Or do people really get why that's the starting point?
Well, a lot of times where I'm meeting my clients is they already have a brand.
Right.
You know, you have a logo, you have customers, you've been in business for any length of time, you've already started to build a brand. So usually the disconnect is that they haven't thought through this type of mapping as to what their brand means to their ideal audience. So it is a matter of sometimes kind of just hitting the pause button a little bit and saying, okay, we need to go back and really say, who are we serving? What are their pain points? How do we deliver them value that they're going to start to know, like, and trust us? And then move them into an active engagement. So it's not so much resistance, but that has happened, Eric. But I would say it's that desire to, like, we feel stuck. Sales are stagnant. We have all these opportunities. Nothing's closing. Nothing's sticking, and we don't know why. We think we have the right, sales team in place, but what are we missing? And it's really kind of peeling back, making sure that they know who their audience is, and rooting it to their mission, their vision statement. Again, pieces that should be coming from that strategic plan, and building out how they're going to move forward through this journey of awareness, explore, and engage. So it's just trying to help them realize that if they keep doing what they were doing, they're going to keep getting the same results. And if marketing is to work for them, or in any situation, you really, really need to get down to the fundamentals. And it starts with understanding that audience and figuring out how their journey is going to lead them to you. Yeah,
that's awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you from Engage, but
oh, all right. But
the connection makes sense to me. And that starting point, it feels really important to me, and I can see the value of it.
It is, because we've all gotten cold calls. I get them all the time, for, SEO leads and this and that, and just out of the blue. I have one guy that I reached back out to because I was so impressed that he actually took time to find out who I was. And he pulled something about my blog, which just happens to be Thoughts on a Full Moon. I named it that just to give myself a writing rhythm. And he, in his first email to me, said something about, there are 13 full moons in 2020. And I'm like, he was on my blog. Why would he say that? So that was really cool. So he kept me engaged, even though I wasn't necessarily looking for what he was selling. He kept me engaged and really piqued my interest because he took time to figure out how to speak to me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that is, that engaged process, when you're moving through that pre-engagement, nothing's concrete yet, but they are a very warm prospect, and you're having conversations, you're answering questions, you're inviting them maybe to some kind of event where they can get the feel of how you work, and you're moving them through that, and then being able to complete the journey, move the journey to that new client phase. And I think, we teased up that there's often a step that gets left to chance. And it's like, yay, we have a win, right? We have a new client, we have a new purchase. And now we need to be able to continue the buyer's journey on the other side of that vertical line that I show there, and figure out what are their first 100 days of dealing with us going to look like. How are we going to build relationship capital with them over the next 100 days? I think B2C clients, customers, businesses, B2C businesses do this much better because they absolutely have to, because there's so much competition. So, you make your sale, you get the follow-up that, hey, your order is set to ship. You get the follow-up, did it arrive, and everything's they've got a great workflow for that. B2B companies, though, I've found that's not always there. They're so, okay, we got the job, let's get in there and execute. Sometimes the nurturing process gets lost, and it may be little things like making mental notes that somebody likes the Yankees. A client of mine shared a story with me that they entered into a new engagement, and just in having human conversation with this new client, they mentioned something about really loving the Yankees. And there was something coming up. I think, I'm not sure if it was the time of year. It may have been, baseball season opening up. They got a bobblehead of a well-known Yankees player and sent it to them about 2 weeks later, after the engagement had been signed, as a thank you. Like, hey, we're so happy to have you on board. We saw this, thought of you. We just had to send it. That made such an impression. It was a low-cost gesture to solidify just that first step along those first 100 days. So it's the little things, it's the intrinsic things for the relationship that go a long way over time.
Yeah, everybody sends tchotchkes when they're trying to get that first meeting, and then they forget about saying thank you after they close.
And you know what, Eric? Guess whose name is on all the tchotchkes?
Yeah, yours. Whoever's trying to sell, not the potential customer. Yeah.
Exactly. So here was a gift, a gesture that was all about that person, because my client listened to what they were talking about, who they were as a human being, and not just as a human doing business with them. They were getting to know them, and they demonstrated that, and that all fits into this buyer's journey, and training your people, your team, to be aware of those opportunities. They're out there, but if you're not listening for them, if you're not taking good notes and developing that persona of your prospect as well as your client, you can miss those opportunities that along the way to really make a great impression.
Yeah, there's a gentleman by the name of Lori Bowden that works for a company, Gilbarco. And he comes to mind as we're talking about this. I'm going to give him a shout out and let him know we brought him up. He was like my rep for Gilbarco. In a lot of B2B, it's kind of like when the deal closes, there's like this huge handoff. And I want to come back to that because I want to talk about mapping that. But there's this handoff, and the closer goes away and the farmer comes in. And it's very disruptive in that relationship, in my opinion, as a buyer. And one of the things that was cool about Larry is he never left the journey. So this was a huge implementation we had to do. It was a multi-million-dollar program, and stayed involved. Anytime I had a problem, I could call him. I never got pushed off to anybody. But he did a neat thing in that when we were done, he came back and threw a luncheon for the whole team and congratulated the whole team on an awesome job. They did a write-up about it in their like blog and all this. But this guy didn't stop at the sale and hand it off to the support or the implementation team. He never left that relationship. And we still have a friendship that resulted from that. So when we talk about the know, like, trust thing, you're doing that to build awareness, but you're retaining it and reinforcing it when you get past into that 100 days and you're building that relationship capital.
Yeah.
And he was a great example of doing that, because it was intrinsic into his character and who he was and how he ran his business. But it's a great example, and I'd love to see more of that follow through mentality instead of pure sell and handoff mentality in the B2B world.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eric. I absolutely agree. There is often that handoff. Sales is going out to conquer the next round of prospects.
Plant flags. Yep.
Right. Now it's somebody's role inside. So that is super important, that is mapped out. To your point, that process is also mapped out and can be as smooth as possible for creating that long-term relationship. So, and obviously, as we've just finished out this horizontal journey here in this kind of this stepping stone path, is when you build that relationship, when you have that client and you've nurtured them, that ends up manifesting loyalty. They are going to buy from you again. They're going to be a long-term client. They are going to offer up referrals. And that's really key. I know one of my personal metrics is how long I have a client. That matters to me. I am not in this for one hit projects. There's too much background foundational work that should be done if the work is going to be done right. So if someone comes to me, hey, Lori, I need a brochure, I'm like, I can put you in touch with someone. But if you need a marketing plan to make sure that you really do need a brochure and what that brochure needs to say, then I'm your person. But just the work that should be going into figuring out what that brochure says and how it looks and how it's distributed is just not something that I want to do as a one-off project. So it's really important to me that I build those relationships with my clients, that I've had clients for 20 some years that I've outlasted a director of marketing and their assistant. So, I mean, that matters to me, that I've built up that kind of relationship and credibility with the company, that I stay, even though some of my direct reports might change. That's really a driver for me. So I think, to your point, Eric, you really need to know what the handoff looks like. What's that 100 days? And there's a great book out by Joey Coleman called Never Lose a Customer Again. And that's just where I learned that, oh my gosh, this really needs to be part of the buyer's journey and identify, those critical, basically first 3 months of the relationship and what it's going to entail and what it's going to look like.
Yeah. And I think as you get into that piece, you can't separate company culture from that. And what I mean is if you have a culture of accountability to your end customer throughout every part of your organization, that's where it really plays out. If everybody in the organization understands that your buyer has personal risk based on their decision to engage with you, whether it's to buy your product or your service or a combination of both, they've made a professional gamble.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to hold them accountable if that project or service or product fails and they chose the wrong partner.
Yes.
So as a company, once you close that deal, You have to be all in on making sure that you are going to prove that that buyer made absolutely the right decision, pick the right partner, pick the right product, whether that's a component or a finished product, whatever. And everybody has to have it in their mind of how are they going to contribute to making that buyer successful because of their decision to entrust you essentially with their career in some cases.
Absolutely. And, there's a flip side to this as well, is when you get to this engaged point, I actually have, a loop going around the top and a loop around the bottom. And that bottom they said no. So there should really be a process internally to understand what happened along the way, that the sale, the closing didn't happen, because that's where a lot of the really key data points can be for improving the buyer's journey, knowing why things did not move into purchase. Maybe they weren't the ideal client. Maybe we missed something. Maybe there's an added set of criteria that we need to factor in. Maybe we dropped the ball. Maybe our messaging was off and we didn't listen to something that they were saying. And if we missed it with one client, are we missing it for others? And really drilling down into why some of the no's happened, to better understand why the yeses came through, and figuring out how we have to adjust our journey, our marketing, our advertising, our sales effort to streamline and make our buyer's journey as efficient and effective as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this difference between the tactics and strategy. And I feel like you're really highlighting why sales exists and why marketing exists. Sales, I don't think, and disagree with me, but I don't think that they are geared to go after the after action component of it. Why'd we miss? But marketing is, and marketing is looking at, okay, is it product placement or price? Is it messaging? Is it brand? It just was the wrong customer or the wrong prospect, those types of things. But I think there's also this loop in recurring business. So subscription-based businesses or products that are consumables. A dumb thing that pops into my mind, like toner cartridges, right? It's this consumable. So there's this recurring business. When somebody exits out of your ecosystem, that's another opportunity for an after action. Okay, why'd we lose that customer? And then what does re-onboarding them look like to try to pull them back in? And maybe you find out you don't want to bring them back in. But I think marketing is very strong at understanding those messages, because they're just in a more of a listening mode, if that makes sense, as opposed to being in a talking mode when it comes to that stuff. Sales is necessarily driven to push on and go through, okay, next prospect. Anyway, I'm not trying to get too deep into that, but I think that goes to your point of these are really complementary things because they each have their own purpose and strength.
Yes. And sales, not to underemphasize having a strong sales team. You have a sales team, a sales force that's well connected, going back to the beginning part of the buyer's journey. They're networking, they've got their circle of influence, their connections that they're working all the time, they're staying out there. And I think, again, this is another place where companies need to look at their whole teams as part of their brand. How do your sales people and the materials that they're sharing, the messaging that they're using, all connecting back to the company's brand. I've been in companies where sometimes there's a disconnect, or there's no marketing support. Honestly, my ideal customer, B2B, they have sales, but no marketing internally. And they're in those industries of manufacturing, construction, and some professional services. So it's when that component of marketing is missing where I can deliver the most value. And it's because I can go in there, I can understand what sales is doing, what they've had to work with or not, and how do we find that know, like, and trust, those factors that are going to help create the messaging on the website, how they present themselves on social. And we were talking before we started the show today about all of the platforms that are out there today on social. And it was a few years ago, you had LinkedIn, you had Facebook, and that was it. and a lot of times my B2B customers like, should we have Facebook? Should we be, like, on LinkedIn? And I'm like, you don't have anybody dedicated to do this? No, we need to focus on making sure your website's where it needs to be, that you're utilizing, getting emails. Like, that's what we need to be focused on. Today, my answer is not the same. Yes, even B2B needs to identify what social platforms they should engage with, as well as those that they shouldn't. So for instance, TikTok is the brand new thing out there, and I'm not on it. But if a client comes to me, hey, TikTok, do we need to be there? I'm like, well, is your audience there?
Yeah.
Oh, well, no. If your audience is millennials, or maybe you're into maybe fitness and wellness coaches, okay, maybe you do need to be there. But if you're in manufacturing, that should not be immediately where your mind goes.
Mm-hmm.
You need to really look at your platform. Could there be some applications? Sure. But companies that I typically work with, they don't have internal marketing departments. They've got a bandwidth, they've got a budget, and the whole idea of this buyer's journey is mapping out how best to reach your audience with the right kind of message delivered where they are. So if your audience is on Facebook, or if they're in LinkedIn, then that's where you should be focusing. YouTube has become almost a necessary piece because videos are so important today. So yes, companies need to be building out a video platform with YouTube or Venmo, not Venmo, Vimeo. But here's the thing. Social also plays a role in your hiring. And so
good point.
So it's not necessarily this is not your prospects and part of your prospect journey for the buyer's journey. However, your social presence also has a factor of how do you attract talent? How are they going to find you? How are they going to perceive you? How do they engage with you as well? So it's just something for a company to keep in the back of their mind when choosing what their touch points are in terms of how they present themselves online. So that's another important just kind of rabbit hole to consider.
Now, it's a great point. I think we touched on this in past episode about how, particularly in the millennial space, your company culture and corporate responsibility weigh in on their decision to both be an employer and a consumer, or customer. So that's an excellent point.
Absolutely. And again, that culture that is being formed among your team from front office to stocking, even really the third-party vendors that you decide to work
Yeah,
with.
that's a very good point too. Absolutely.
That all fuels this. It all fuels this process. So it's all interrelated. It's really important.
Yeah, I mean, if you ship something to your customer and the carrier damages it or it's late or whatever, you take the hit for it. And you know, that's the easy example of a partner. But you could have an installer, an engineer, a whatever, everybody that you maybe engage in, your brand is going to take the hit if they fail to deliver consistent with the expectations you've set.
So this is one of the dangers of working at home, Eric.
It's one of the bright spots, I think. I know my listeners are many of them are working from home, and have the same thing going on. We had we've had conversations about getting onto calls with clients, and one of our team members who's awesome. Her son is, I think, 2 or 3 months old, and she's like, "Are they going to get upset if Lincoln cries?" I'm like, "Nope, because you might hear one of their children cry too." So I think it's bringing some real humanity into the world again. So I love it.
Absolutely. So just to kind of recap, this buyer's journey is, identifying the ideal prospect is first step. Getting really clear on that, and it is an evolution. It is not a once and done thing. Your clients are going to evolve as your services do, as your companies do, as things in the external world change. And one of the things, we are working at home dealing with dogs and kids because really, our business world has been disrupted. So our buyer's journey has been disrupted too. And where I'm seeing companies really step up is taking the time to realize that what we thought was our buyer's journey has now just totally changed. People who were driven by their calendars, being face to face all the time with their clients or prospects, now had to figure out how to pivot and bring all that online and be able to share value through a screen, through an email, through some other, be it video, be able to share the same type of connection and value to people that they are no longer able to touch in the same way that we did 8 weeks ago. So I think this whole buyer's journey is so important right now because it has been totally blown up. We see some companies pivoting so well, and we can throw some examples out there. I know I have one client who I think has just done a fantastic job of figuring out how to take their offerings. It wasn't about creating a new offering, but taking their offering, paring it down for smaller groups and sharing out that way versus trying to think, we're going to sell a 5-figure engagement the same way that we did back in January. It's not going to happen. Dove soap. I saw commercials for them where they were showing how to wash your hands properly.
Right.
They're a soap company. They're educating. They just, they wanted to meet people where they were, and people right now are figuring out what does my world look like among all of this health information that we're getting. And then I don't know if you've noticed it, Eric, there are a lot of empty slots, advertising slots on TV.
Yeah.
And I got an opportunity to see a gentleman by the name of Richard Eldman talk. And he was just sharing, he's like, and this goes back to our podcast from last week, our first one, where now is not the time to pull back your marketing. Now, I understood there's dollar amounts involved with this, But your customers, your potential customers need to know where you're at, where you stand in all of this, how you can help them get through this. And it's not a good idea to go radio silent. So it really brings us back to this buyer's journey, companies looking at, okay, my previous buyer's journey was just, blown up. What do we need to do to reconnect with our current customers, and how do we continue to attract new ones, and just really rethink this awareness, explore, engage, and that conversion into a new client.
Yeah, and it brings kind of the genius out of this mapping that you've done, in that if a company has done this prior to an event like COVID-19, it's now a recalibration. It's not a panic of, oh my God, what are we going to do? We at least have a starting point, and we can go from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is really powerful stuff.
Yeah. I love sharing it. I think it really does help to, when you look at it in a linear fashion like this, it just helps to really see where the points of contact happen, and how they need to be unique to your business and to your audience.
Yep. So let's just take a quick step back to the beginning. There were three things we promised people that if they stuck with us for the podcast. The first was what we would explain the buyer's journey, which I think we have, and I think it's amazing. And we talked about what is the pivot. We talked about getting to know who your audience is, and creating that ICA, that ideal client avatar. We talked quite a bit about ideal prospect, and covered that. And then we promised this little surprise, I guess, that was the key step often left to chance. Do you want to elaborate on that lesson there?
Well, that is really that your buyer's journey doesn't stop after the sale. Mm-hmm. And that you really have a unique opportunity once they are a client, because we all know it takes a lot of money and effort to get a client. And once you have them, it makes sense to really invest with the team in keeping that client happy. It costs a lot less to keep them than to go out and find one to replace them.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Remember, understand their pain points throughout their journey, not just leading up to the sale, but after, and listen, really bring your entire team into that, developing the buyer's journey with you, so that you can really create a great experience that's going to, over time, elevate the brand and create that relationship capital that you want to have.
That's awesome. Well, another episode in our series done.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody. We appreciate it. And we'll have, this will drop. It'll be coming. We'll stick to every Tuesday morning. So we've got a couple more episodes in the series coming. Lori, as always, thank you so much for being generous with this information and helping people out.
Absolutely.
I really
thank you,
appreciate
Eric.
that. All right, everybody. Thank you.